Hi, I'm Lenise Brothers, a registered nutritionist, women's health, hormone, and menstrual cycle coach, and the founder of Eat, Love, Move, a nutrition and well-being practice. This is the Period Story Podcast, where in each episode, I sit down with a guest to talk about their period story. We get behind some of the myths and misconceptions about periods and so much more. Now, on to today's guest. On today's episode, we have Kaysha Thomas. Kaysha is a registered nutritional therapist, Pilates teacher, and blogger working to make mental health well-being accessible and inclusive. Kaysha covers topics such as eating disorder recovery, body image and diversity issues within the wellness industry, and is currently studying for a master's in sport and exercise nutrition. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Lenise.
So let's get into the first question I always ask, which is the story of your very first period. Can you share with us what happened?
Yeah. So I started my periods quite early. I was still in primary school. So I think I would have been 9 or 10 when my period started. And I remember being ready for it, as in I had the conversation and I knew it was coming. I knew what periods were. I think I've been very fortunate in both of my schools that we talked about sexual health, but we talked about, menstrual cycle and even sex education. So we had all that information quite early on back then in my day. It was done in primary school. So when my period started, I was expecting it. And I just remember waking up one morning and it had started. And I just said to my mum, it was kind of like, the time has come. My periods have commenced.
In a really big, loud, godlike voice.
Yeah, I really felt like I just came into the world like, Mum, I think you find I'm a woman now. Can you pass me the pads? So that's pretty much my story. And I think I feel I'm very aware that my first period was a pleasurable, it's a bit far, but it was a nice story. Yeah.
9 or 10. So I've interviewed other people who have said that their period has come at that age, and they've said that they didn't feel ready. So I feel like that's quite different, hearing that you had spoken about it at school, and so when the time came, you were ready. Talk about how you learned about it at school.
I remember, so this is where it gets a bit hazy, because I remember just always been the talk about periods. So we knew that periods were a thing and that they were coming. The actual education about you're going to have a period and this is what you need to do came from my mum, but it was initiated from my auntie. So I started developing breasts, and I think this was like the signs that, okay, Kaysha's getting boobs now. Clearly, if her periods haven't started, they're on their way soon. And my mum's quite a young mum, hadn't thought about having that conversation with me. And it was her younger sister, my auntie, that said, have you spoken to Kaysha about periods? And my mum was kind of like, as my mum kind of is now, like, oh, I haven't had that conversation. Oh, do I have to do it? And then I remember quite vividly sitting on her bed, at the foot of her bed, and her telling me about periods. But she was telling me it wasn't news, but I didn't know about the care. So I didn't really know. But some of the things that she told me weren't quite true. And I think it was kind of old information. So I remember one of the things she told me was that when you're on your period, you can't wear trousers and that you have to wear a skirt. And to this day, I didn't really understand why she said that, because I couldn't understand, why would I not be able to wear trousers? And I'm quite a sporty girl. I was quite a sporty girl, and I still am in some ways. So I didn't really wear skirts, and I didn't like that information. I was just like, oh God, I gotta wear a skirt? Can I still wear my cycling shorts underneath? So anyway, we had that conversation, but she was talking to me more about the care. So getting a pad, changing your pad regularly and stuff like that. So that's pretty much how I was brought up to speed on what to do and what periods were.
And when you got your period, were you the first of your friends to get it?
And this is interesting because, yes, I was, but it wasn't really talked about. I don't remember it being like you've got your period, you haven't got your period. It was, I think I was definitely one of the first of my friends. I remember a few other friends getting their periods in primary school as well. But it wasn't a thing that we really talked about, which, yeah, again, I think is quite interesting. So I know there can be a lot of stigma around that sort of who started, who hasn't. But it really, I don't remember it being a focus at school. But I remember it being like again, another little announcement that you just say in the playground, like, oh yeah, so my period started. No way. And then that's kind of as far as it went. Yeah.
Did you feel different in any way to your friends after you got your period?
I would say it was more the fact that I developed early that made me feel different. The period wasn't the thing that made me feel different. It was the fact that I had quite large breasts at quite a young age. And that got me a lot of attention from both boys and girls, and not always in a positive way. And I think that was the thing that made me feel most different. And, also the fact that I loved running, and I saw these boobs it's painful when they're just budding, they're just coming through, and they're so painful. And I just remember thinking, man, this really sucks. Like, I've got to grow these things. I want to run fast. And it's just I run and it hurts now. I don't think we had sports bras those days, or at least I didn't have one. So it was like a whole, that was more my thing, kind of why do I have boobs now? What are these? Why?
And how long did it take you to come to terms with what was happening with your body?
I would say by secondary school. My secondary school was an all-girls school. By that time, I felt really comfortable with everything. I was, by that point, 11 years old, settled into my menstrual cycle, was regular. Weirdly, didn't wear a bra for a long time. I would wear a crop top. This is another conversation that my mum neglected to have. Well, didn't remember to have with me, that I wore crop top for a long time. So that was the only time. And again, I felt quite different, because I remember it was like PE. We're getting undressed and I have my crop top on, and all these girls had their bras, and they were like, Kaysha, why don't you have a bra? And I was like, why do I need a bra? Bearing in mind, I've had boobs for nearly 3 years at this point. But yeah, I felt very, very comfortable having those, not comfortable, but it feels a bit more normal by secondary school. And like I said, there were no boys around, so it makes conversations like that a lot easier.
You said it was easier to have those conversations. Did that contribute to how comfortable you felt with your period and your body?
Yeah, I would say so. I definitely would say so. And I think it just was normalised, I think is the way I would describe it. It wasn't, it wasn't so much something that I had to really focus on. It was just so normal. If somebody needed tampons, you'd give them tampons. If somebody didn't have their pad, you'd give them a pad. And it was just very, very normal. I remember there was one girl in my school who had really, really heavy periods, actually. I remember she had a few sort of accidents at school, and, that sort of, gets around. It was kind of like a gossip, but it was more out of oh my gosh, is she okay? So it was very, it was very sort of, it was very holding in terms of periods. I think I've been, again, really blessed in the schools that I went to, and the way that we were educated around this stuff. And I think that is, really, really important.
Yeah, it's very different to the experience that some of my other guests have described of feeling shame or feeling different. It's very, very, very different. Very, very, you should feel very blessed, because
I definitely am. Yeah. I definitely am. I think a lot of the conversations that I have now with my clients, much younger generation, for the most part, they didn't have that experience. They weren't even really taught, how to look after their vulvas, let alone how to manage their periods. So I was kind of taken aback when I say I remember it was my friend's sister came in and did a talk for us. And this was in secondary school, teaching us about hygiene, feminine hygiene, and how to, telling us that, sometimes, or for the most part, try and go to bed without wearing any underwear. Let your vagina breathe. Yeah. And so that's something that I've always remembered since secondary school.
Yeah.
And I run a nutrition group at the clinic, the eating disorder recovery clinic that I work for. And I was, I just kind of realized, like, gosh, how lucky am I that I had these conversations? Because a lot of young girls don't.
Yeah, they really don't. And there's so much shame around periods. And I'd say that 90% of the guests that have come on have used the word shame or discomfort or feeling different when they've talked about how they first learned about their period. How would you describe your relationship with your period now?
I would say I wouldn't go as far as say love-hate, because I wouldn't say I ever hate it. I mean, I do definitely have this thing where I have to slow down when my period is on its way, and when it's around those first 2 days of menstruation for me. I don't, nowadays in particular, and for the last, I'd say, few years, I can't. I have to really slow down. I have to take it easy. The first couple of days are quite heavy. The second day is very painful. So this is when, despite my plans, I have to take time out. And I have to I even think about how I schedule my private clinic, because I won't overload myself in those weeks. The work that I do is quite deep work. I'm talking to people with a lot of trauma. Around your time of the month, you're actually, you're very sensitive, you're very emotional. So you have to be so cautious and really think about your own self-care in terms on how much you load yourself up. And I have to say, this information I wasn't given as a child. And this was something that I learned in my womanhood by myself.
So you adjust your work to where you are in your menstrual cycle, and you slow down right before your period and and during your period. How does that change when you're ovulating?
I think it's quite literally only those first sort of, I would say, the week leading up to, and then the first 2 days is the only time I really need to make adjustments. Other than that, I couldn't. This is Denise, I'm terrible. I couldn't tell you where I was in my cycle otherwise. I just know when it's coming, and I know when it's there. And beyond that, I think it's really interesting that this sort of. I saw that you made a post recently about sort of creativity and your cycle, and I was like, actually, that's interesting. So that's something I'd be quite interested to learn more about. But yeah, I don't pay much attention to the rest of my cycle. Oh my God, how bad.
Yeah, something that it's worth thinking about is the inverse of what you do around your period. So around ovulation, when typically energy rises. So I was thinking about when you teach Pilates, do you notice a difference then? Are you able to do longer holds or do more? I don't even know any of the names of the Pilates poses, but the one where you're in the V and you're holding, it's like
the teaser.
Yeah, that one. Yeah. Can you hold that for longer? Those sorts of things. So look at the difference between your strength and your energy around ovulation, and then compare that to how you feel around your period.
I'm really interested to have a look at that. I know there's I think she's a nutritionist, a lady called, I think her name is Stacey Sims, and she's doing a lot of work around sort of energy and period and in particular looking at sports performance. When you talked about that particular move, the teaser, that is one that I avoid at all costs because I'm just generally not good at it. My legs are very heavy. That's my excuse anyway. But that is really interesting. And I think I think you've inspired me to really have a look at that. So it has been something that's been on my mind. It's like, I must look into that type thing. But actually, I'm really curious now to see how that actually works out for me.
I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about your work around eating disorders. So you trained as a nutritionist, but you specialize in eating disorders, which is quite, as you say, quite involved work involving a lot of trauma. Talk a little bit more about why you decided to specialize in this area.
Yeah, I would say where I qualified as a nutritionist almost 10 years ago, and my early work wasn't eating disorder recovery. It was never my intention. It definitely wasn't my intention to go down that route of specialization. But I was always very aware, despite myself at that point being very much a dieter. So when I was doing my nutrition training, when I qualified, when I was first practicing, I was still the person who was stepping on scales, wanting to know my weight, wanting to, do gym this many times a week and all the rest of it. But I always knew that was never the same advice that I would give my clients sitting in front of me. So when I had a client come to me about weight loss, I would never tackle the weight loss head on. I would do the lifestyle around. And if you come into balance, weight might change. And if it doesn't, how does it feel? That maybe that might be your genetic blueprint and where your body lies. So it was interesting. I always had this little bit of an internal battle between what I was doing with my own body versus the advice I'd give my clients. So then what happened was I started working at the Recover Clinic. And this was sort of me trying to find my place in nutritional therapy, because there weren't many people, particularly not here in the UK. And this is before I even knew what, anti-diet approach was and all this stuff. I couldn't really find anyone that spoke my language. Who even thought about nutrition in the way that I did. So I did always just feel quite alone. And that's when as I did my sort of like looking around, trying to seek my tribe, I realized that this is, the narrative that we use within eating disorder recovery. So it happened quite nicely as I was doing that research that I found the Recover Clinic, or they found me. I'm not really sure how that worked out, but I started working there, and I instantly knew, I still learn, and I had to do a lot of learning then, but I instantly knew that this is the work that I'm supposed to do. This is the work that I want to do. And I think it's just, there's a whole group of men, women and children out there who just need to hear a different narrative. So that's kind of how I fell into it, let's say.
So talk a little bit more about what you said about an anti-diet approach. What does that mean?
Yeah, and I think so anti-diet just meaning that it's not focused on weight loss. So the focus is weight loss, the focus is health. And when we say health, we're talking about mental and physical health. And I think I think the mental health aspect often gets forgotten. Maybe that's a bit too harsh, but at least sort of sidetracked, let's say, or sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Deprioritized. That's exactly the word I wanted. So anti-health just means we're actually looking at the person as a whole and looking at behaviors around food and beliefs around food and lifestyle factors such as sleep, exercise as well, but in a really balanced approach. And that weight loss isn't the central piece, isn't the central part of that work. Yes, a person may lose weight on that journey. Some people need to gain weight, and that might be the case on that journey as well. And that's what anti-diet is. It's just sort of, that focus away from weight loss in and of itself. This idea that weight loss is the most important thing for health, which just, isn't true.
And then your work with women or people with eating disorders, it's quite specialized, and you deal with a lot of trauma. How do you talk a little bit about how you work with your clients to start to separate their food behaviors from everything else that's going on with their health?
I think the thing I love sharing with clients at the beginning is the idea that when we feed ourselves, it's like the ultimate form of self-care. And that blows their mind, because they're often not aware that food and to feed and nourish oneself is an act of self-care when they've been manipulating that for so many years. So once they get that idea that, all of the eating disorder behaviors are a form of self-harm, and that it's just a massive red herring that is distracting them from a much deeper issue. And then, an eating disorder very successfully, and that's its whole aim, is to disconnect a person from their body. So they're so disconnected, they're not aware of the emotions that they're holding in their body. So they're not aware that they're anxious. They're not aware of their depression. and then if you think more from the nutritional side, they're not aware when they're hungry. They have no connection to their hunger signals. They don't know when they're full. They don't know when they're tired. They're usually always tired, but they haven't even connected to the fact that they're tired. So all of that. So it's about bringing the awareness to what the real issue is. And this is where we have this cliche saying where it's not about the food, but it is about the food. And it's the not about the food bit that you have to highlight them to. This isn't about you wanting to be smaller. This isn't about that. This is about a trauma or, an emotional issue that you're trying to escape from, that you're trying to distract from, that you're not wanting to deal with because it's too painful. And I get that. This is why I work with psychotherapists. And you're using food and exercise behaviors as a way to sort of just skip out on that sort of work of just looking at what's really going on.
Have you seen a rise in eating disorders?
Yeah. It's going up, and it is going up. And I am quite literally probably one of the worst people to ask about statistics, but I looked this one up for this very conversation. And actually what we've seen is that from 2005, 2006, there's been a 34% increase in admissions for eating disorders. That's a lot. And I was surprised at that number. I knew there had been an increase, but I didn't expect it to be that number. So we're looking at about 7% each year. I think a lot of that is to do with more awareness around it as well. But it's huge here in the UK, and and these are the ones that we know of, and this is eating disorders are so sort of nuanced, and a lot of people get missed. People of color often get missed, often don't get the diagnosis because it isn't something that's considered when they present in their GP surgery. But yeah, eating disorders like binge eating disorder, which is the second most common form of eating disorder. This is one that people don't often reach out and get help for because they just think they're eating loads because they think that because they're quote unquote dieting, it's actually restriction. But because they're dieting, then they suddenly have this binge eating. They think it's to do with this sort of play, the restrict binge cycle. And they often don't seek help for it. But also because eating disorders bring so much shame that a person doesn't even want to tell somebody about the behaviors that they're engaging in, which is always a real relief when they come into my clinic and I'm just like, do you know what you're telling me, without sort of minimizing or sort of, trying to take away from their experience. I really like them to know that this is not uncommon. The behaviors that you're telling me about are not uncommon with eating disorders and what you're, and how they present. And it's always such a relief when they hear that, because they just think they're the only ones doing these damaging behaviors.
Can you talk a little bit more about the types of eating disorders that you see for people who are hearing what you're saying about eating disorder, but think they might have something, but aren't sure what it is?
So I would say that eating disorders, well, we have all these different ones. You have anorexia, which has different types as well, subtypes. But you've got bulimia, you've got binge eating disorder, and then you have, and I always have to check because it recently changed, but you have other specified feeding or eating disorder. So one that doesn't come under any of those categories. And so the common thing throughout all of those eating disorders is the restriction. Every single one of those eating disorders have a restrictive nature to them. So that's the first thing. But they all are also very preoccupied with their weight and wanting to be smaller, and not really understanding why that is, and often not being able to see their bodies for what it is as well. So if you think about anorexia, in some cases of anorexia, you can have anorexia in different body types. But if we're talking about anorexia in a smaller body, they don't realize how small their bodies are. And this is strive to be smaller and smaller and smaller. And, there are always going to be nuances to this. That, not everybody is focused on weight, actually. But for the most part, that's what you most commonly see. So this preoccupation with food is everything. It's something that they think about constantly, but I mean like constantly, obsessively, because they're hungry for the restriction. And sort of, so this preoccupation with food, but also a fear of food. So not being able to navigate social situations, not being able to sit and have dinner with family and friends because they're afraid of what this meal in front of them is going to do to their bodies, i.e. it's going to make them gain weight, or it's just going to make, their thoughts around their body really, really, we say loud. So really heightened negative thoughts around body image and self. So these are the common things that I would say that people see. And then the other part would be, in some cases, I'm always having to say some cases here because I want to make sure that I want to be clear that not everybody will experience it the same, but these are common symptoms anyway. Over exercising, so really going all out when it comes to the exercising. Exercise being something that it's a non-negotiable. It's like, I have to do this. I have to do this, this, and this, and this, and this, regardless of how I feel. Which again, I'm going to go back to this whole thing where, this whole, linking it in with energy and your period and your cycle, which I think is really interesting. But, a person who is using exercise as a way to distract from difficult emotions will exercise come hell or high water. It's obsessive. It's compulsive. And so a lot of their brain space, a lot of their time is just taken up by those things: changing my body, making my body smaller, restricting food, counting this, tracking that, weighing myself, measuring myself, body checking, and it just keeps going.
And given the work that you do around eating disorders and people really restricting themselves, how do you then what do you think about this whole rise of anti-diet culture, which can be quite strong online, where it's, people saying things like F you diet culture, and really taking it not to the other end, but going really tearing up all of the templates around how we're supposed to think about our body?
Yeah, it's this thing when you see narrative that is aimed towards diet culture, it's aimed at diet culture. It's not aimed at people who are on diets. And so I think that's really important to highlight that it's the narrative of the diet culture that tells you that smaller is better. And that, I think, you almost, and I get it, I try to be a bit more direct but gentle, I guess. In I don't tend to swear on social media. I hope not anyway. But I tend to be more gentle in my approach. But I'm very direct about the culture that I am, in some ways attacking, or at least protesting against, because that culture is actually quite strong and quite inflammatory in itself. And for those who are in the diet, those who are in that diet culture, so those who subscribe to that diet culture, honestly, some of the messages that you read there, sometimes I think, what is this? It gets to the point where you don't even know whether this is an eating disorder or is this a diet now, because it's very disordered, the behaviors that they're trying to promote. And this is, when you're passionate about eating disorder recovery and you're advocating for a group of people who are subscribing to that, and it's quite literally killing them, you do get very, very passionate, and you do have to be quite strong in your language around the diet culture. But equally, they it's that narrative that thinner is better, and that's what we're attacking. And this idea, it's not just thinner is better, it's that that your aesthetics somehow holds some kind of value over your worth, which it doesn't. Our bodies are our bodies. Our bodies change. And so you've got people who live in all different types of bodies. We have fat, we have thin, we have curvy, we have muscular, however you want to label it. We are diverse as humans. And then this idea that diet culture, where they've got this template body, or this is what we're all striving for, as though it was accessible for everybody, as though it were even possible for everyone. And you've got people literally spending their whole lives trying to achieve this aesthetic, which they may never achieve, or if they do, they've done it at the risk of their own physical and mental health. So it can sound quite inflammatory, and it can sound quite, I don't want to say violent, but I can get how people, I get why people get annoyed at some of my posts and some of those posts, because they could take it personally, but because they're subscribing to the culture, and it's the culture that we're attacking, not people who are on diets. I've been there myself. I was there for over a decade, so 100 understand what a person's going through.
I want to ask you two questions. First, about what you said about people who are on these diets who are then, it's more like disordered eating. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so no, so it wasn't that people who are on diets like disordered eating, but a lot of the behaviors that they will advise, and this is particularly, I would say, I'm talking about social media here, so I can't say what dietitians and nutritionists are saying in their office because I'm not there, but particularly the things that I've seen, and certainly clients who have come to me and been told some interesting thing from their healthcare providers. But again, you don't know where that person was trained, you don't know what that person's qualifications were. But anyway, things like this idea that we have to manipulate our hunger, this idea that when you're hungry, you need to do all sorts of things other than eat to manage that hunger. This is disordered. This isn't normal. If you're hungry, that's a signal that you ought to eat. But you get these ideas of like, go brush your teeth, just go to bed earlier, avoid your hunger. Hunger is bad. And this is disordered. So it's not to say that a person who engages in this has disordered eating. I mean, I could have possibly diagnosed that. But it's to say that these quote unquote techniques that they're trying to prescribe are disordered. They're not normal way of eating that doesn't create a healthy relationship with food in your body. And that's an extreme one, sort of the brush your teeth, but when you're feeling hungry. But I've seen that out there, and I've seen it a lot of times, and I've seen it in magazines, and this is what people pick up on and will remember. Maybe when you're hungry, you're not really hungry, you're thirsty. I mean, if you don't know if you're hungry or thirsty, then we need to look at why you don't know whether you're hungry or thirsty, rather than thinking about manipulating hunger by drinking a glass of water.
I have to say, I do see that people not being able to differentiate between physical hunger and thirst, and also people not being able to differentiate between physical hunger and this emotional hunger and eating for emotional reasons. And I certainly don't specialize in eating disorders, but it does, some of these behaviors do come into my work with my clients, especially this idea of delineating between physical and emotional hunger, because it's in this culture we get taught, oh, you're upset, dive into Ben and Jerry's. You're feeling great, oh, have some cake, and so people can't differentiate between this, oh, I'm actually hungry, my body is sending me signs that it's time to eat, versus, oh, I feel sad or I feel happy. So I think that's really interesting, because this sort of programming gets taught at a really young age.
Yeah. I mean, we are, even with emotional eating and comfort eating, the way I approach that with my clients is sort of not being able to differentiate between emotional hunger and physical hunger, is that, emotional eating isn't in and of itself a bad coping mechanism, but if it's your only coping mechanism, then you need to look at some other, fill up your toolbox of self-care, because it can't always be food, because that's also not helpful. But so sort of, and we do see, we've been conditioned, we've seen it on films, we see it in the adverts, like people tend to turn to ice cream when they've had a breakup, and it's just like, okay, but what about journaling? What about call your mom? There's all different ways. But it isn't to say that emotional eating in and of itself is bad. But like I say, it's just when it's the only coping mechanism that a person has. Because it's all about connecting to body. What is the signal that my body is telling me? What is my body asking me for? I.e. rest. Is it water? Is it food? Is it, emotional?
You talked about the difference between diets and diet culture. There will always be people out there who want to lose weight. And what I've seen now in my clinic is that people feel ashamed about talking about wanting to lose weight or feel better in their body, and they feel better when they're at a smaller size. And if they talk about this on Instagram or any social media, it's like they get attacked. Love your body at any size, love who you are, you shouldn't feel like you have to lose weight. But they say, well,
but I just want to, I want to slim down. I want to feel better in my clothes. What do you say to that?
I say I have so many responses to that, and my head just went to so many places. So I'm just going to try and categorize and line them up and just decide which one I'm going to go for first. I completely sympathize with somebody who feels like they need to be smaller in order to feel better about their body. I think it is, my go-to response to that, and is that it's not about your body being smaller, why you want to feel better about it. It's because of the way you think about your body. Our bodies change regardless. So this idea that if my body's smaller, I feel better, I can tell you now that is not always going to be the case. A person will get smaller in their body, get to even maybe their quote unquote goal weight, and still have hang-ups about their body, because it wasn't the body that was the issue. It was what bodies they see to be good bodies. So who are they looking at? What bodies are they idealizing? And what are they trying to mimic within their own bodies to try and achieve, like I say, that aesthetic that might not be available to them through their genetic blueprint, through the resources that they have available to them. Have they got time to do all those hours in the gym? Have they got the money to buy those foods that people are, advocating and advertising? Sorry. So there's that. So the idea that, so smaller doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to feel better about your body. Not saying it doesn't, but not necessarily. There's an emotional piece that needs to be looked at there in terms of healing your relationship with your body, whether it's bigger or smaller. So that's separate from its size. The other part is, I think it isn't helpful if somebody says that they feel a certain type of way about their body, it's not for anybody else to comment on their post and come with what we call toxic positivity of just love your body, because if it was that easy, the person would, quote unquote, just love their body. That's dismissive of what that person's experiencing. I appreciate that and it often comes from people, often not always, comes from people who already live in a smaller body. So they have what we call thin privilege. And then for that person with thin privilege to tell somebody in a bigger body, oh, you should just love your body, has no idea what it's like for that person to exist in that body. So to just say that you should just it's not that simple, because of the weight stigma that person has encountered throughout their lives, which in itself brings a lot of shame. So when you talk about that shame that they feel about wanting to lose weight and people's reaction, that shame is, also past shames of people making comments about their weight, perhaps. And that can come from childhood, that can come from parents, that could come from, even your health professionals. We have a big thing around weight bias that goes on in our healthcare system at the moment. So there's that as well. And then, if that's where a person is in their life and that's all they know, then that's all they know. And it's about, my work is very much about meeting people where they're at. So, 95%, probably even more, I would maybe go as far as to say 100 actually, % of people who walk into my clinic want to lose weight. So it would be so disrespectful of me to sit there and be like, I know, but you shouldn't want to lose weight. Because it's not that easy. It's so disrespectful to the whole process and emotional turmoil that they've been going through. So I think we do have this culture of toxic positivity on social media that doesn't help. And we kind of have to remember there is a person behind that post. And just be mindful of, what their experience might have been existing in the body that they have.
Yeah. I think your words really resonate with me. I have been on my own personal journey with weight loss and weight gain. And even the work I do, I would never say I'm 100% reconciled with my body. I had messages from when I was quite young about, you people meet you and they say, oh, you've lost weight, or they say, oh, you've gained weight. And for a long time, whenever I saw my mother, the first thing she would say and it became a joke. It was, how's your weight? How's your hair? How's your teeth? Those would be the first things that she would ask me. And I had to make it into a joke, because otherwise I would get really angry. I remember this one time I went to see her, and I was going through this big emotional time, and I had gained quite a lot of weight. And the first thing she said to me was, Denise, what's going on with you? You've gained a lot of weight. And we had this huge fight on the street where I said, why do you always have to ask me about that? You know, can't you see that? Can't you ask me about everything else that I'm going through? So, and then for me, it's been, and I'm getting quite personal here. It's been a real journey ever since. And I know I'm not 100% reconciled with the weight that I am. And, you know, I would be lying if I said that, you know, I feel I haven't had thoughts about losing weight, because I do. So this is where some of the things that you're saying on an intellectual level, they make total sense. But emotionally, I'm kind of like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, no, and I totally hear you, Lenise. I absolutely hear you. And, you know, this idea that I think even the idea of, well, first of all, so I should go back to say it's really difficult, that experience of somebody not seeing you and only seeing your weight as though it were some indicator of that, as to how you were. And we do that a lot in our society. We do praise people when they lose weight, which feeds into that narrative of, oh, well, when I'm smaller, that's a good thing. That means when I was bigger, what were people thinking about me? And it kind of confirms those sort of negative beliefs that a person holds about themselves. So that's really difficult. And I can 100% sympathize with you, because my mum to this day does the exact same. When she sees me, I think you've lost weight, haven't you? Oh, I think you've put on. At this point, my weight doesn't really fluctuate. So I don't know what she's saying, but anyway, so that's besides the point anyway, but it is one of the first things that comes out of her mouth. But this is generational. So it's like, we got to think about where they're getting that narrative from. And, you know, it's not just our mums, it's going to go way back. Right. So there's that. But yes, and I totally hear how, you know, this idea of loving the body, I think it's a really unrealistic thing. Again, this toxic positivity that we see on social media a lot, that you have to love your body and be positive about it. So do you know what? Some days you don't love your body, myself included. Some days you just don't. And oftentimes that's not because there's an issue with your body. Oftentimes because you just have an issue with something else going on, and it gets directed at your body. Or just sometimes you're just not happy with, you know, I feel bloated today. And that's okay. You know, it's not about shoulding. There's no shoulds here. It's about thinking about how you want to exist for the rest of your life. You know, do you want to exist for the rest of your life thinking about, oh, if only I lost an extra X amount of pounds and that would make everything fine? Likelihood is that won't be the case. You know, there are going to be days, like I say, that you love your body. There are going to be days that you don't. And there are going to be days that you're just indifferent. And I'm very much now doing a lot of work with my clients towards this feeling neutral about their body. Because our bodies aren't who we are. They don't tell you anything. You know, I have a real issue with focus on body. I've had focus on my body literally all my life. So I've talked about, you know, breasts at a very young age, got a lot of attention for that. I was always very athletic, very muscular naturally. I get a lot of praise about that, or lots of comments about it. I'm just like, this is just my body. It's not a commodity. Not saying, I mean, give me compliments, like, please, I love it. But it's this idea that it somehow is something to be praised all the time. And actually, I think to myself, sometimes I think, are people seeing that I'm also intelligent? Are they seeing like other parts of my personality, or they're just seeing my body? That's difficult. And that goes on, you know, no matter what your body shape is, it's like, that can't be the thing that people see you as. And it's about that internal work that you have to do as well, to think about, okay, I am more than my body. What makes me me? What are my values? What would I tell a client sat in front of me? What would I tell my daughter? What would I tell my sister? You know? Yeah.
So thinking about everything that we've talked about on the show today, if you want a listener to take one thing away, what would you want that to be?
I would say the word that always comes into my mind, and I think the word that I'm really drawn to at the moment, is just being authentic, and thinking about what authentic health means to you, as in what's within your genetic capabilities, what's within your resources of time, money, your mental capacity. So just being really authentic with yourself, and just being, you know, really self-compassionate in that sense. This idea that, you know, everybody can afford to do the stuff that diet culture and wellness industry, I would even go that far, prescribes isn't available to everybody. It's not even suitable for everybody's palate. So just that, that being authentic, and also, as a person who comes from a Caribbean heritage, I don't see any Caribbean food in these recommendations. So, that whole thing of just like, what brings you joy? And just honor that. We are, and this is a little bit deep, but genuinely, we're here for a short amount of time. We're not here forever. So, really thinking about, what do you want to spend your good brain power and time on this earth doing? And I think you find, from a personal point, I already lost 10, 15 years of my life to trying to manipulate my weight. I refused to do that any further from there. I had to do a long healing journey and just a lot of self-compassion, and it's ongoing work. It's not overnight. I still have to do that work. It's never going to end. I still have to, read. I still have to meditate. I have to do self-care and things towards my body. So, look after your mental health and your physical health. Your mental health, shapes your physical health.
Yeah.
So just remember that. Yeah.
There's this great Nora Ephron quote where she talks about, if she could go back, she would be wearing a bikini from the age of like 21 to 35, so it's like, just wear the bikini, wear the swimsuit, go on the beach, and you don't want to look back thinking, oh, why did I just lay there in my clothes while everyone else was having fun?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Absolutely.
So where can listeners find out more about you and your work?
So I'm more active these days on Instagram at Kaysha Thomas. I have my website, KayshaThomas.com. I half laugh there because I'm just like, I'm not blogging anywhere near as much as I should be, but that's where my website is. That's where you'll find details about me. And then as of next week, my YouTube channel as well. So I'll send you the link, Lenice, and you can link it up in the show notes, as they say.
Yeah. Yes, we will indeed link it in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, Kaysha. It was really interesting and illuminating speaking to you.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it, Lenice.
For more inspiring conversations, head over to periodstorypod.com, where we have so many more for you to peruse. If you want help with your menstrual or hormone health, email me on hello@eatlovemove.com to set up a free 30-minute hormone health review. If you like today's show, please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Tag us, come say hi, and send in your requests for who you'd like to see on the show on Instagram and Twitter on @periodstorypod, or email us at hello@periodstorypod.com. I'm Lenice Brothers, and you've been listening to Period Story. Thank you so much for listening.